So we reached to the point of commercial war games. A decade or so after World War II, Charles S. Roberts developed the game called Tactics, and it involved two hypothetical countries that went to war with each other. This was evidently the first of the modern commercial war games as we know them. Charles Roberts was basically advertising business, and he was indulging in the commercialization of the hobby of playing with small toy soldiers. He was in 1958 realizing that a lot of people were getting interest in this type of niche. So he founded the Avalon Hill Company, and we reached the point in which Avalon Hill Company is going to experience a lot of growth, especially in the 60s. During 1961, a lot of games start to be produced. Most of those games were war games. For example, Gettysburg, Tactics 2, U-Boat, Chancellorsville, D-Day, Civil War, Waterloo, Bismarck, and Stalingrad, to name a few, were the actual stars of Avalon Hill, which was at the time basically selling 200,000 games a year. So it is important to take note here that, yeah, even though Avalon Hill was having a good and very successful beginning, then it reached to a halt, and the company plummeted down, not even reaching 1965. The situation was that apparently there were not too many sales. It was not so popular, the hobby of playing with small figurines and simulating warfare. Then comes the Simulations Publishing Inc., which would be the SPI, founded in the late 1960s. So this is going to create a little bit more of a thrust for the history of war games. In this case, the founder of SPI is going to begin publishing and promoting the actual war games through magazines such as The General, and the one very important magazine of the time that was Strategy and Tactics, or S&T. The S&T Advertising and Publishing magazine was publishing regularly in 1967. So at the end, with Strategy and Tactics magazine, unlike Avalon Hill, which was not having a very good publishing strategies, was actively promoting publishers' games, and the promotional efforts gave all of the new publisher a leg up and expanded the reach of the war games even more. Now I'm going to drop here a manual war game sales from 1960, 1991. Unit sales of war games, paper or manual types per year indicated in here. We see that From 1964, which was the fall of Avalon Hill, it was in 62,000 units sold, and gradually it went up a decade for 743,000, which is tenfold. And suddenly in 1980, there's going to be a boost in sales. This is for the United States market. And you have the 2,200,000 copies sold in 1980s. So you can see here that for the 1980s, the wargaming companies were gaining a lot of revenue and they were growing a lot very fast. And then we start seeing a decline in the 90s. Perhaps not so low as to go down for what it was known in the 70s, but evidently there is going to be a decline in what is the market for the war games. These are sales comprising historical war games and fantasy titles. Just moments before, we mentioned that in the 80s there was an increase in sales. This was because computer war games entered into the market until 1980. So this was a very powerful thing in the market because by the mid 80s, computer wargame sales have moved past manual wargame sales, and evidently this was beating the manual wargames. And then we reach to the point that the most innovative and influential of these new game systems was the role-playing game Dungeons and Dragons that was developed by Gary Gygax and Dave Arneson in 1973. From this point on, the public is going to tend to like more what is called fantasy and science fiction. SPI's first science fiction game was Star Force, published in 1974, and was one of the best sellers for the SPI. The science fiction and fantasy topics were doing very well. So the shift towards fantasy and science fiction somewhat dismayed many of the older gamers, and most of the original wargamers were history buffs, but about 30% were also into fantasy and science fiction. Three other big forces to emerging wargaming in the 1970s were the serial games and the gaming conventions.